In this video, we are going to look at questions that require students to add numbers with differing place values. So in these two questions, we're adding hundredths and tenths. So in the first question, 37 hundredths plus 4 tenths, and in the second, 7 tenths plus 85 hundredths. In class, we're really practicing reading our numbers. So for example, reading this as 37 tenths and not 0.37 or 0.37, just to make students pause a little when they see an addition or subtraction question similar to these, and realize that because the place values are different, we can't use our knowledge of 37 plus 4, for example, to solve the first question, because we are adding 4 tenths and 37 hundredths. So the first thing that we practiced was finding different visual ways to compare tenths and hundredths. So we looked at it in class on a number line and also with parts of a whole in a rectangle. So let's look at these quickly. So the first thing that students should be able to recognize is that 0 tenths and 0 hundredths are equivalent numbers, so 0. And 10 tenths, or 10 divided by 10, and 100 hundredths, or 100 divided by 100, are also equivalent, in this case, to 1. From there, we'll use our rectangles and start comparing the parts of a whole or the size of the piece if you're looking at these numbers as fractions. So in the first rectangle here, we divided it into 10 pieces, and each piece is equivalent to 1 tenth. And in the second rectangle, which is divided into 100 pieces, each little square is equivalent to 1 hundredth. And what we'll notice from these pictures is that it would take 10 hundredths to be equivalent or to color in or shade in the same portion of the whole as 1 tenth. So we can look at our number line then and be comfortable in saying that 1 tenth will be equivalent to 10 hundredths. By the same way, if I had 3 tenths, I would need to color in 30 hundredths or 30 little squares to shade in or to color in an equivalent portion of my square. So 3 tenths will be equivalent to 30 hundredths. Now to represent a half, which I've done in these two squares here, students can visualize the rectangle or visualize the whole, but they should also see the relationship between the numerator and the denominator. So in this case, if I'm working with tenths, if I have 10 pieces or a whole cut into 10 pieces, a half of 10 is 5. And if I'm working with hundredths, a half of 100 is 50. And then we can use what we've filled in so far to help us recognize that 7 tenths would be equivalent to 70 hundredths, and 9 tenths would be equivalent to 90 hundredths. Students might have to draw the number line or the rectangles when they're starting their practice with tenths and hundredths. So in this case, the equivalency that I want to recognize is that 4 tenths is equal to 40 hundredths. So I can rewrite this expression as the sum between 37 hundredths and 40 hundredths. Because the place values are the same here, I can use my knowledge of whole numbers, so 37 plus 40, which has a sum of 77, to find the sum of 37 hundredths and 40 hundredths, which will be 77 hundredths. Now if we move to our second expression, I'm actually going to change both of these into fractional representations of decimal numbers. So the first equivalency that I need to recognize is that 7 tenths is the same as 70 hundredths. And then I'll write both of those numbers as fractions. So here I have 70 hundredths and 85 hundredths. And at this point, I can use my knowledge of whole numbers again and find the sum of 70 and 85, which is 155, which will give me an answer to my original expression of 155 hundredths. Now, why I like to visualize or to picture fractions is because when I'm left with an answer like this, 155 hundredths, if I make the connection between fractions and a division, so 155 divided by 100, it really jumps out at me that my answer needs to be larger than 1 and smaller than 2, because 100 hundredths would be equivalent to 1 and 200 hundredths would be equivalent to 2, which in this case gives me an answer of 1 and 55 hundredths, or 155 hundredths. There are practice questions available on my website. Thanks for watching.